I never thought a pile of snow would nearly bankrupt me. But here we are, sitting in my truck at 3 in the morning, watching steam rise from the coffee cup in my hand while 20 tons of snow sits in the bed behind me, ready to make history in the worst possible way for the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. My name is Zachary Jenkins, and I have lived in this God-forsaken planned community outside of Boulder, Colorado for 6 years. 6 years of painted mailbox violations, lawn height warnings, and passive-aggressive notes about my garbage cans being visible from the street for more than 12 hours. But this winter, they crossed a line that turned me from a quiet software engineer who just wanted to live his life into someone willing to commit what I can only describe as architectural sabotage. It started in late November when the first big snowstorm hit Colorado. We got 2 feet overnight, and like any responsible homeowner, I grabbed my snowblower and cleared my driveway. The problem was that my property sits on a corner lot, which means I have about twice as much driveway as everyone else, and nowhere to put the snow except in neat piles along the edges of my property. I made them as tidy as possible, kept them away from the sidewalk, and thought nothing of it. 3 days later, I found the first notice tucked into my door. It was printed on the HOA's official letterhead, complete with their ridiculous logo of a house with a laurel wreath around it. The letter informed me that according to Section 14.7 of the Community Guidelines, snow piles could not exceed 4 feet in height at any point, as they were considered visually disruptive to the neighborhood aesthetic. My piles, apparently, measured at 5 feet 2 inches at their highest point. The fine was $250. I stood in my doorway, reading this letter 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. They were fining me for snow being too tall, snow that would melt in a few weeks. Snow that I had to put somewhere because I could not exactly teleport it to another dimension. I called the HOA office immediately, and that is when I first spoke to Brenda Morrison, the HOA president and the woman who would become my nemesis. Brenda had that particular tone that all career HOA enforcers seem to develop, a sickly sweet voice that dripped with false sympathy while delivering absolutely unreasonable demands. She explained that the rules were the rules, that everyone had to follow them, and that if I had concerns about where to put my snow, perhaps I should consider hiring a snow removal service to haul it away. When I pointed out that this would cost me hundreds of dollars every time it snowed, she suggested that homeownership came with responsibilities. I paid the first fine because I was still naive enough to think this was a one-time thing. Then we got another storm, and another. Colorado was having one of its snowiest winters in decades, and every single time I cleared my driveway, the piles got bigger. I tried spreading them out more, but that just meant more piles. I tried packing them down, but they still exceeded the 4-foot limit. And every single time, like clockwork, Brenda or one of her cronies would be out there within 48 hours with a measuring tape, documenting my violations. By mid-January, I had racked up over $2,000 in fines. $2,000 for snow. I had tried everything. I attended an HOA meeting to contest the fines, where Brenda sat at the head table with her reading glasses on a chain around her neck, flanked by 2 other board members who nodded along with everything she said. I presented photographs showing that other homes had snow piles just as tall, but Brenda explained that those had not been reported yet, and if I would like to file complaints about them, I was welcome to do so. The way she smiled when she said it made my blood boil. I hired a lawyer to review the HOA documents, costing me another $800, only to discover that yes, technically, the rule about snow pile height was in the original covenants, buried on page 47 in a section about seasonal yard maintenance. It was absurd, but it was legal. The lawyer said I could fight it in court, but that would cost thousands more with no guarantee of success, especially since I had already paid some of the fines, which could be seen as acknowledging the validity of the rule. That is when I started to get creative. I borrowed my buddy Marcus's truck, which had a much larger bed than mine, and I started hauling snow off my property. The first few loads I just drove to an empty lot a few miles away and dumped it. But that got old fast, and it was not solving the fundamental problem that every time it snowed, I would be right back where I started. The final straw came in early February. We got hit with a massive blizzard that dumped 3.5 feet of snow over a 2-day period. The city plows came through and created an additional mountain of snow at the end of everyone's driveways. I spent 6 hours over 2 days clearing my driveway, and by the time I was done, I had snow piles that reached 7 feet at their highest point. There was literally nowhere else to put it. My entire property line was ringed with snow. I knew the fine was coming, but I was not prepared for what showed up in my mailbox 4 days later. The notice informed me that due to repeated and flagrant violations of the snow pile ordinance, my fine had been escalated to $1,000, and if I did not remove the excess snow within 72 hours, I would be fined an additional $500 per day until compliance was achieved. Furthermore, the HOA was placing a lien on my property for all unpaid fines, which now totaled over $3,000. I sat in my kitchen, staring at this piece of paper, and something inside me just snapped. I had been a model resident for 6 years. I paid my dues on time. I followed their ridiculous rules about paint colors and fence heights and what type of flowers I could plant. And now they were going to put a lien on my house because of snow. Snow that I had no control over. Snow that would melt in a few weeks anyway. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Brenda's smug face at that HOA meeting, the way she clearly enjoyed wielding this petty power over people. I thought about the clubhouse where the HOA held their meetings, a fancy building at the center of the development that my HOA dues helped pay for, complete with its flat roof that I had always thought was a stupid design choice for Colorado. And that is when the idea hit me. If they wanted to fine me for snow being too tall on my property, fine. I would remove it, all of it, and I would put it somewhere that was not my property. Somewhere that would make a point. Somewhere with a flat roof that could definitely handle a lot of weight, at least according to the building specs I had seen posted in the clubhouse during a meeting. I spent the next 2 days planning. I called Marcus and another friend, Derek, and explained what I was thinking. Marcus thought I was insane but also hilarious. Derek, who had his own issues with the HOA over his front door color, was immediately on board. I needed to do this carefully. It could not be vandalism, not exactly. The clubhouse roof was HOA property, and I was an HOA member. I was just relocating snow from my property to community property. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it possibly illegal? Maybe. Did I care anymore? Not even a little bit. Marcus had connections in the construction world and knew a guy who could loan us a dump truck for a day, no questions asked. The clubhouse parking lot had easy access, and the building was only 1 story tall. If we brought a loader and worked fast, we could pile snow on that roof all day long before anyone realized what was happening. The weather forecast showed clear skies for the next week, which was perfect. I spent 2 days loading snow from my property into Marcus's truck and my truck. Hauling load after load to a storage area we set up in Derek's business lot across town. Derek owned a landscaping company, so he had a front loader we could use. We worked like madmen, and by the end of the second day, we had removed every bit of snow from my property that exceeded the 4-foot limit, plus a bunch extra just to be safe. We also drove around to some other streets and collected snow from public areas where the plows had piled it up. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. By the time we were done, we had approximately 20 tons of snow stockpiled and ready to go. The clubhouse sat on a half-acre lot at the center of Meadowbrook Hills, a brick and timber building that Brenda loved to brag about at meetings. The roof was flat with a slight drain slope, surrounded by a short parapet wall. It was perfect. We decided to do it on a Tuesday morning. Most people would be at work, and the clubhouse was only staffed on weekday afternoons and weekends. We would have from sunrise until about noon to get as much snow up there as possible. Monday night, I barely slept again, but this time it was from anticipation rather than rage. At 5 in the morning, my alarm went off. I met Marcus and Derek at the storage lot at 5:30. We had the dump truck, my truck, Marcus's truck, and Derek's front loader. We looked like the world's weirdest snow removal crew. The sun was just starting to come up as we pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. The building sat dark and quiet. We had to work fast. Derek positioned the loader and started scooping snow into the trucks. We had rigged up some plywood ramps that would let us drive partway up the side of the building. And Marcus, who had actual construction experience, assured us the roof could handle the weight. Commercial buildings in Colorado were required to handle significant snow loads anyway. The first few loads were nerve-wracking. Every car that drove by on the main road made my heart jump. But we were on HOA property, and it was not like we were breaking in or damaging anything. We were just putting snow somewhere. Lots and lots of snow. By 7 in the morning, we had created a respectable pile on the clubhouse roof. By 8, the pile was massive. By 9, you could see it from the street, a gleaming white mountain sitting on top of the clubhouse like the world's worst architectural feature. We kept going. Every time one of us suggested maybe we had made our point, someone else would say, "One more load," and we would keep going. At around 10:30, we saw the first sign of trouble. A silver Lexus SUV came speeding into the parking lot, and I recognized it immediately. Brenda. She must have driven by on her way to run errands and noticed something was off. She got out of her car, looked up at her beloved clubhouse roof, and just stood there with her mouth open. We were in the process of dumping another load, and there was no pretending we were doing anything other than exactly what we were doing. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Brenda's voice hit that pitch that only truly outraged middle-aged women can achieve. She was wearing a burgundy pantsuit and had her hair in that specific style that required weekly salon visits to maintain. I climbed down from the truck bed and walked over to her, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "Good morning, Brenda. I am removing excess snow from my property as per your notice. Since you specified it needed to be removed but did not specify where it should be relocated, I chose to bring it to community property. This is our community clubhouse, after all." Her face went through several colors, settling on a deep red. "You cannot put snow on the roof. Are you insane?" "Actually, I checked the building specifications. This roof is rated for a snow load of up to 40 pounds per square foot, which is standard for commercial buildings in Colorado. We are well within the safety limits." I had done my research. This was technically true, though I was probably pushing those limits. "This is vandalism. This is property destruction. I am calling the police right now." Brenda fumbled for her phone. "It is snow," I said simply. "On HOA property. I am an HOA member. I am not breaking anything or spray painting graffiti. I am relocating snow as per your directive." 2 other board members showed up within 15 minutes, probably called by Brenda. There was Richard Kimball, a retired accountant who always looked constipated at meetings, and Susan Palmer, who taught at the local elementary school and seemed to think being on the HOA board made her some kind of civic hero. The police showed up about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, looking confused about why they had been called to look at snow on a roof. Brenda launched into a frantic explanation about how I was destroying property and harassing the HOA. I calmly explained that I had been fined repeatedly for snow on my property, that I was simply removing it as directed, and that I had not damaged anything. The younger officer, whose name tagged Reed Morrison, which made me wonder if he was related to Brenda, walked around the building, looked up at the roof, and then came back looking like he was trying very hard not to laugh. "Madam, I do not think this is actually illegal. He did not break into the building. He did not damage anything. He put snow on a roof. It is weird, but weird is not against the law. But he cannot just dump snow wherever he wants." Brenda was practically vibrating with rage. "Actually," the older officer, whose tag Reed Garcia, said slowly, "if this is community property and he is a member of the community, I am not sure what law he has broken. You might have a civil issue here, but it is not a criminal matter." Brenda looked like she might have a stroke. "Fine, fine. Then I am issuing him a citation right now for unauthorized use of community property, and we are holding an emergency board meeting tonight to discuss his removal from the community." "You cannot remove me from the community," I said. "I own my property. You can fine me, which you have been doing excessively, but you cannot kick me out. That would require a lawsuit, which I would win, especially since I have documented every ridiculous fine you have issued." That seemed to give her pause, but only for a moment. "We will see about that. Remove this snow immediately, or you will be fined $1,000 per day until it is gone." "Sure," I said. "I will remove it as soon as all my existing fines are rescinded and the snow pile height rule is amended to something reasonable." We were at a standoff. The police left, making it clear this was a civil matter. Brenda and her board members retreated to the parking lot to make phone calls, probably to their HOA attorney. Marcus, Derek, and I dumped 2 more loads just to make the point, and then we packed up and left. That night, my phone exploded with calls and texts. Apparently, word had spread fast through Meadowbrook Hills that someone had buried the clubhouse in snow, and opinions were divided. Some people thought I was a hero. Others thought I had lost my mind. Several people called to say they had been dealing with their own ridiculous fines and wanted to know how they could help. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night, giving them 2 days to prepare their case against me. In the meantime, the snow sat on the clubhouse roof like a monument to petty revenge. It was beautiful. I spent Wednesday documenting everything. I made copies of every fine I had received, every email exchange, every notice. I compiled photos showing that other properties had similar or worse snow pile violations that had not been cited. I put together a timeline showing the escalating fines and the completely unreasonable nature of enforcing a snow pile height limit during the snowiest winter in years. I also did more research into Colorado HOA law and discovered that HOAs had a legal obligation to enforce rules fairly and uniformly. Selective enforcement was actually grounds for invalidating fines. Thursday evening, I walked into the clubhouse for the meeting. Or rather, I tried to. They had moved the meeting to the community center 2 blocks away because, as the sign on the door explained, the clubhouse was temporarily closed due to roof maintenance concerns. I almost laughed out loud. The community center meeting room was packed. Apparently, this was the most exciting thing to happen in Meadowbrook Hills in years. I recognized most of my neighbors, and I could tell from the expressions which side they were on. The older residents who had nothing better to do than police everyone's yard looked disapproving. The younger families who were tired of the constant nitpicking looked amused or supportive. Brenda called the meeting to order, slamming her gavel like she was a judge presiding over a murder trial. She was wearing another pantsuit, this one navy blue, and she had printed out what looked like 50 pages of documentation. We are here tonight to address the reckless and destructive actions of Zachary Jenkins, who deliberately vandalized community property and created a safety hazard that has forced us to close the clubhouse indefinitely. I raised my hand. Point of order. I did not vandalize anything. I relocated snow to a roof that is structurally designed to hold snow. Nothing is damaged. The weight of that snow could cause roof damage or collapse, Susan Palmer chimed in. Then you should probably have that roof inspected, because if it cannot handle what is essentially a normal Colorado snowfall worth of snow, it is not up to code and we have bigger problems. I kept my voice level. I have the building specifications right here if you would like to review them. Richard Kimball cleared his throat. Regardless of whether structural damage occurred, you had no authorization to use the clubhouse roof as a dumping ground. That is misuse of community property. I would argue that fining me over $3,000 for snow on my property that I had no reasonable way to remove is also misuse of authority. I stood up and addressed the room. For those of you who do not know the full story, the HOA has been fining me repeatedly this winter for having snow piles over 4 feet tall on my property. Despite the fact that we have had record snowfall, despite the fact that I have a corner lot with twice as much driveway as most homes, and despite the fact that I have nowhere else to put the snow, I have been fined over and over. The last fine was $1,000 with a threat of $500 per day after that. They placed a lien on my house, over snow. There was a murmur through the crowd. Several people looked surprised like they had not heard this part of the story. A woman in the back raised her hand. I recognized her as Helen Anderson, who lived a few streets over. I received a notice about my snow piles too. They said I would be fined if I did not reduce them, but I do not have anywhere else to put the snow either. How are we supposed to comply with this? Another hand went up, and another. It turned out that Brenda and the board had been issuing these notices to multiple homes, but mine were the only ones that had escalated to such extreme fines because I had pushed back. Brenda tried to regain control. The rules are clearly stated in the community guidelines. Everyone agreed to follow these rules when they purchased their homes. The rules also state that the HOA board must enforce regulations fairly and consistently, I countered. I have photographs from the past 3 months showing at least 15 properties with snow pile violations identical to or worse than mine. Why was I the only one fined to this degree? That stumped her for a moment. Richard Kimball jumped in. Those violations had not been formally reported. But the HOA board can observe violations independently, correct? You do not need a formal complaint to issue a citation, which means you saw these violations and chose not to fine those homeowners while you repeatedly escalated fines against me. That is selective enforcement, which is actually illegal under Colorado HOA statutes. I could see some people in the crowd nodding. Brenda's face was getting red again. Furthermore, I continued, I spoke with 3 different snow removal companies, and all of them quoted me between $400 and $700 per storm to haul snow off my property. We have had 8 major snow events this winter. You are essentially requiring me to spend up to $5,000 to comply with an aesthetic rule about snow that will melt naturally in a few weeks anyway. That is not reasonable, and I would argue it exceeds the HOA's authority to impose such a financial burden for a temporary, weather-related condition. A man in the front row who I did not recognize stood up. My name is Tom Brennan. I am an attorney, and I live on Hilltop Drive. I have to say, Mr. Jenkins makes several valid legal points. Selective enforcement is absolutely grounds for invalidating fines, and requiring homeowners to spend thousands of dollars to comply with rules during exceptional weather conditions could be seen as overreach. If this went to court, the HOA would likely lose. Brenda looked like she wanted to explode, but she was trapped. She glanced at the other board members, who suddenly seemed very interested in their paperwork. The meeting devolved into arguments after that. People who had their own grievances with the HOA started speaking up. It turned out Brenda had been running the board with an iron fist for 3 years, and a lot of residents were fed up. There were complaints about fines for Christmas decorations being up 2 days past the January 1st deadline, about paint color approvals taking months while fines for faded paint were issued immediately, about the board spending HOA funds on expensive upgrades to the clubhouse while neglecting basic maintenance in other areas. Helen Anderson made a motion to suspend all snow-related fines for the remainder of the winter, given the exceptional weather conditions. It passed by a voice vote that was overwhelmingly in favor. Richard Kimball tried to argue that only board members could make motions, but Tom Brennan pointed out that according to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner in good standing could make motions at community meetings, and they had to be voted on. Then someone else made a motion to rescind all existing snow-related fines issued this winter. That one passed too. Brenda tried to call the meeting out of order, but people were done listening to her. Someone made a motion for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA board. That sparked a massive debate, but eventually it was agreed that a special election would be held in 2 weeks to determine if the board should be replaced. I walked out of that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. The snow was still on the clubhouse roof, but I was no longer being fined for it, and all my previous fines had been rescinded. I would have to deal with removing it eventually, but that seemed like a problem for later. Over the next 2 weeks, Meadowbrook Hills turned into a political battleground. There were flyers and door-knocking campaigns, and a Facebook group that exploded to over 200 members arguing about HOA governance. Brenda and her board members insisted they were just following the rules and maintaining property values. A coalition of fed-up homeowners argued that the board had overstepped and turned the HOA into a source of stress rather than a beneficial community organization. Marcus and Derek helped me remove most of the snow from the clubhouse roof before the election, just to show good faith. We hauled it to the same empty lot I had been using before, and nobody bothered us about it. The clubhouse roof showed no signs of damage, which kind of proved my point about it being structurally sound. The special election had the highest turnout in Meadowbrook Hills history. 72% of homeowners voted. Brenda, Richard, and Susan were all removed from the board by margins of more than 2-1. A new board was elected that included Tom Brennan, Helen Anderson, and a guy named Marcus Wright who was not my friend Marcus, but happened to share his first name and had strong opinions about reasonable governance. The new board's first action was to conduct a full review of the community guidelines. They eliminated or modified dozens of rules that were overly restrictive or unenforceable. The snow pile rule was changed to simply require that snow not block sidewalks or streets, and that it be placed on the homeowner's own property. Height limits were removed. Several other rules about holiday decorations, lawn care during droughts, and exterior paint colors were relaxed. They also conducted a full audit of HOA finances and discovered that Brenda had been approving expenditures for the clubhouse that were well above what the board had authorized, including a $15,000 kitchen renovation that nobody had voted on. The clubhouse did not even have regular events that needed a fancy kitchen. It was mostly used for monthly meetings and the occasional birthday party rental. In March, after a particularly warm week, most of the remaining snow in the neighborhood melted. My property was clear, my fines were gone, and I had become a minor folk hero in Meadowbrook Hills. People I barely knew would wave and give me thumbs up at the grocery store. Brenda, on the other hand, was not doing well. Word spread about the unauthorized expenditures, and several homeowners started asking uncomfortable questions about where their HOA dues had been going. The new board, to their credit, conducted a thorough investigation. It turned out that over the past 3 years, Brenda had approved or personally made expenditures totaling over $90,000 that were either unauthorized, questionable, or outright fraudulent. The fancy clubhouse kitchen was just the start. She had hired her nephew's landscaping company to do community maintenance at rates well above market value. She had purchased furniture and decorations for the clubhouse from her sister's interior design business, again at inflated prices. She had even been reimbursing herself for administrative expenses, like mileage and supplies, without proper documentation or board approval. The new board turned their findings over to a forensic accountant, who confirmed that this looked like embezzlement and financial fraud. In late April, the HOA board made the decision to file a police report and pursue criminal charges. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Brenda tried to play it off as simple bookkeeping errors and miscommunications. But when the police got involved and started pulling bank records, the picture became very clear. She had been treating HOA funds like her personal slush fund, and she had hidden it by being aggressive about fining homeowners for petty violations, which brought in additional revenue that helped cover her tracks. The thought that my snow pile fines had partially been about generating revenue to cover up embezzlement made me furious all over again. But it also meant that karma was working overtime, because Brenda was now facing potential felony charges. In June, Brenda Morrison was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The total amount she had stolen or misappropriated was estimated at over $75,000 over 3 years. The story made the local news, and suddenly Meadowbrook Hills was famous for all the wrong reasons. Or the right reasons, depending on your perspective. The trial was scheduled for September, but Brenda's attorney worked out a plea deal in August. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 18 months in jail, with credit for time served, plus 5 years of probation. She also had to pay full restitution to the HOA, which meant she had to sell her house in Meadowbrook Hills to come up with the money. The irony of her having to leave the community she had ruled over so tyrannically was not lost on anyone. Richard Kimball and Susan Palmer were not charged with crimes, since the investigation found that Brenda had been hiding her expenditures from them as well, but their reputations were ruined. Richard moved out of state to live with his daughter. Susan resigned from her teaching position due to the stress and gossip, which I actually felt a little bad about, since she had mostly just been a follower rather than a mastermind. As for me, life in Meadowbrook Hills improved dramatically. The new HOA board operated with transparency and common sense. They held regular town halls where homeowners could voice concerns. They published detailed financial reports every quarter. They stopped nitpicking everyone about minor aesthetic issues and focused on actual community maintenance and improvement. I became friendly with several of my neighbors through the whole ordeal, including Helen Anderson, who turned out to have a wicked sense of humor and hosted a neighborhood barbecue that summer where the main topic of conversation was swapping stories about ridiculous HOA violations we had all received over the years. Marcus and Derek got a kick out of the whole thing for months. Every time it snowed the following winter, Marcus would text me asking if I needed help with any roof relocations. The snow pile rule change meant I could actually manage my driveway like a normal person without fear of fines, which was all I had wanted in the first place. The clubhouse got a new roof the following spring, not because the old one was damaged by snow, but because it was 15 years old and due for replacement anyway. The new board made it a priority, using properly budgeted HOA funds, and they even took bids from multiple contractors to get the best price. Imagine that. I learned several valuable lessons from the whole experience. First, sometimes standing up to petty tyrants is worth the risk, even if it means doing something as absurd as putting 20 tons of snow on a building. Second, communities work better when people actually pay attention to who is in charge and hold them accountable. Third, never underestimate how quickly things can unravel when someone who has been abusing power finally gets exposed. Looking back, I probably should have handled things differently. There were legal channels I could have pursued earlier. I could have organized other homeowners before it escalated to the point of snow-based revenge. But would it have been as satisfying? Probably not. Would it have exposed Brenda's embezzlement as quickly? Maybe not. The story of the Meadowbrook Hills snow incident became a bit of a legend in Boulder County HOA circles. I heard from friends in other communities that their HOA boards had become noticeably more reasonable after hearing about what happened. Apparently, nobody wanted to be the next viral HOA horror story. The local news had done a whole segment on HOA overreach and homeowner rights, using our situation as the prime example. Tom Brennan, the attorney who had spoken up at that crucial meeting, actually started a small side practice specializing in HOA law and homeowner rights. He told me later that he had been fed up with his own HOA's nonsense for years, and that watching me fight back had inspired him to do something about it professionally. He now helps homeowners across Colorado navigate HOA disputes, and he credits the Meadowbrook Hills situation with launching that aspect of his career. The Facebook group that formed during the election evolved into an actual neighborhood community group. People used it to organize events, share recommendations, help each other out, and yes, occasionally vent about issues. But it was the healthy kind of community engagement rather than the toxic enforcement environment Brenda had created. Helen Anderson and I ended up serving on the HOA board together for a year when Tom Brennan had to step down due to work commitments. It was actually kind of enjoyable when the focus was on making the neighborhood better rather than catching people in violations. We organized a community garage sale, improved the playground near the clubhouse, and established a fund to help elderly residents with snow removal and yard maintenance, which seemed fitting given how this all started. My property values did not plummet due to relaxed HOA enforcement, which had been one of Brenda's big arguments. If anything, Meadowbrook Hills became a more desirable place to live because people heard it had a reasonable HOA, which is apparently a rare and valuable thing in the world of planned communities. I did eventually get a reputation for being the guy who would push back against unreasonable authority, which led to some interesting situations. When the city tried to rezone part of our neighborhood for commercial development without proper community input, I was one of the people who organized the opposition. We won that fight too, though with significantly less snow involved. The following winter was much milder, which was almost disappointing. I had my snow removal strategy all figured out, and we barely got 2 feet total all season. But I did not miss the stress of wondering if I was going to get fined every time I cleared my driveway. Marcus bought a house in Meadowbrook Hills the next year, specifically because he said he wanted to live somewhere with a good HOA war story and reasonable board members. We still laugh about that morning dumping snow on the clubhouse roof. Derek still has photos on his phone that he brings out at parties. The clubhouse eventually got renamed the community center, and the new board opened it up for more regular use. They started hosting game nights and hobby groups, and it actually became a place where neighbors got to know each other rather than just a venue for punishment hearings disguised as HOA meetings. I ran into Brenda once, about 2 years after everything went down. She was at a grocery store in a neighboring town, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished. She saw me, and for a moment I thought she might say something, but she just turned and walked the other way. I felt a weird mix of vindication and pity. She had brought it all on herself through greed and power trips, but watching someone's life fall apart is never entirely satisfying, even when they deserve it. What did stick with me was the reminder that systems of power, even small ones like HOA boards, need oversight and accountability. When people have authority without checks on that authority, bad things happen. Brenda had operated for 3 years without anyone seriously challenging her because most people did not want the hassle of fighting back. It took something as absurd as snow pile fines to push someone past the breaking point and expose the whole corrupt system. I got letters occasionally from people in other HOAs dealing with similar situations, asking for advice. I always told them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, organize with your neighbors, and do not be afraid to make some noise. I stopped short of recommending property-based snow pranks, though I did acknowledge that sometimes creative solutions get attention when normal channels fail. The legal world took notice too. A Colorado state representative actually introduced a bill the following year that would reform HOA regulations and make it easier for homeowners to challenge unreasonable fines and selective enforcement. The bill cited several cases, including Meadowbrook Hills, as examples of HOA overreach. It passed, which meant that my pile of snow on a roof had indirectly contributed to actual legislative change. That felt pretty good. My parents thought the whole thing was hilarious. My mom kept the newspaper article about Brenda's arrest on her refrigerator for months. My dad, who had dealt with his own HOA battles in Arizona, called me his hero. My sister, who lived in a house with no HOA, said I was insane for ever buying in a planned community in the first place, and she might have had a point. The software engineering work I do is mostly remote, which means I was home during the day more than most of my neighbors. That made me more visible to HOA enforcement, which is probably why I got targeted so heavily. After everything settled down, I actually appreciated working from home more because I got to see the neighborhood functioning as an actual community rather than a collection of properties to be policed. I also developed a healthy skepticism about rules for rules' sake. Yes, communities need some standards. Nobody wants their neighbor turning their front yard into a junkyard. But there is a huge difference between reasonable guidelines that preserve property values and quality of life versus nitpicky regulations designed to exert control and generate fine revenue. Learning to distinguish between the two, and being willing to challenge the latter, was an important life lesson. Years later, when people ask me about the most interesting thing I have ever done, I tell them about the time I put 20 tons of snow on an HOA clubhouse roof to protest unfair fines. The reactions are always entertaining. Some people are shocked. Some think it is the funniest thing they have ever heard. Some immediately want to know how they can do something similar to their HOA. I always emphasize that it worked out in my case partially because I happened to be right, and partially because it exposed deeper corruption that needed to be addressed. I do not necessarily recommend property-based revenge as a first resort, but I also do not regret it. Sometimes you have to do something dramatic to get people to pay attention to an injustice, even if that injustice is as seemingly trivial as snow pile height restrictions. The practical skills I gained were unexpected bonuses. I learned way more than I ever wanted to know about Colorado building codes, snow load calculations, HOA law, and community organizing. I learned how to file public records requests, how to analyze financial documents, and how to build coalitions with neighbors. These are not skills I thought I would need as a software engineer, but they proved valuable. Most importantly, I learned that individuals can make a difference, even against systems that seem immovable. Brenda had seemed untouchable for years, protected by her position, and the apathy of most homeowners who could not be bothered to get involved. But it turned out that all it took was one person willing to stand up, make some noise, and refuse to back down, even if it meant looking ridiculous in the process. The snow melted. The clubhouse roof survived. The HOA reformed. Justice was served. And I gained a story that I will be telling for the rest of my life. Every winter when it snows, I look at my driveway, pile the snow wherever is convenient on my own property, and smile knowing that nobody is going to find me for it. That is a freedom I will never take for granted again. Life in Meadowbrook Hills is pretty good these days. The current HOA board focuses on actual community improvement. We have reasonable rules that people can actually follow. Nobody is embezzling funds or using their position to harass neighbors. The clubhouse hosts community events instead of kangaroo courts. And somewhere out there is a construction crew that has a funny story about the time they helped a guy bury an HOA building in snow. Would I do it again if I had to? Absolutely. Though hopefully, I will never have to, because the whole point was to prevent this kind of abuse from happening in the first place. The new systems and oversight in place at Meadowbrook Hills should prevent another Brenda from taking over and running roughshod over homeowners. But if it does happen, well, I know a guy with a dump truck and a front loader. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the most effective protest is one that is creative, unexpected, and just absurd enough to capture people's attention while making a legitimate point. Snow on a roof checked all those boxes. It was harmless enough that I could not be arrested, dramatic enough to make the news, and symbolically perfect as a representation of the burden the HOA had been placing on homeowners. In the end, everyone got what they deserved. Brenda went to jail and lost her ill-gotten gains. The complicit board members lost their positions and reputations. The homeowners got a functional HOA that actually served their interests. And I got my story, my freedom from ridiculous fines, and a reputation as the guy who fought back and won. Every neighborhood has its stories. Some have stories about the time someone's Christmas decorations were too bright, or someone painted their house the wrong color, or someone hosted a party that got out of hand. Meadowbrook Hills has the story about the time someone put 20 tons of snow on the HOA clubhouse roof and accidentally exposed an embezzlement scheme. I am okay with that being our claim to fame. The snow is long gone now, melted and returned to the water cycle, probably to fall again someday as rain or snow somewhere else. But the impact of that snow, the change it catalyzed in my community, that remains. Better governance, more community engagement, legal reforms, and a whole bunch of people who learned that they do not have to just accept unreasonable authority without pushing back. And on cold winter mornings when I am out clearing my driveway, I sometimes look at the pile of snow building up along my property line, think about everything that happened, and laugh. Because somewhere in that pile of frozen water is a reminder that sometimes the most ridiculous solutions lead to the most important changes. You just have to be willing to look a little crazy, stand up for what is right, and occasionally, literally and figuratively, make it snow on someone's parade. Or in this case, their clubhouse roof.